this is superficial. I understand that this is superficial. Foundational history, culture, and lived experience have been grounded on this. The guy that wants to simply call the whole thing off is not a neutral player in the game. He or she is an agent on behalf of forces in the game. Take responsibility for that position. Let's talk about the other example that I wanted to talk about.
Imagine if your ancestors were rounded up, chained, shipped to another country, and enslaved. I don't deny the cruelty of slavery in America, but perhaps what you deny is the progress that Black Americans made despite that cruelty. We made progress for America. We fought wars for this country, and when we came home, we were lynched in our uniforms. We built America with our bare hands. Slavery didn't build America. Slavery stifled America because it took people who could have been innovating and treated them like animals. But what we did build were Black Wall Streets in cities all over the country. Ladies, look, racism has unleashed untold brutality on Black Americans, and Black Americans have exhibited untold resilience in the face of it, which makes Black Americans some of the most patriotic Americans, because despite America not living up to its ideals and its mistreatment of us, we believed in those ideals and fought to make them a reality.
That's all good. It's a clip and it leaves out a lot of what you guys developed.
How do you feel about the idea that it might be possible and even enlightening to integrate what Ibram Kendi has to say with what Coleman Hughes has to say? Let's just start there. Like, is that framing of the two sides kind of like a framing that you would get on board with and like would want to kind of see an integration of?
Okay, that's a helpful question. And my answer is I think such a project would be a fool's errand.
Okay.
I think it would be completely misconceived. I think it would be magical thinking.
And that's because you think the thinking is just inherently unintegratable. Like those two ways of thinking just don't play well together. Well,
both that, but more importantly, that I don't think that's a worthy intellectual goal. I mean, I'm sorry for how this will sound. I think it's lazy. I think it presumes that that either of them is creditable.
And you think neither
doesn't. And where'd that come from? Where you say framing? Where did that? Maybe there are more than two sides. Maybe
for sure. Again, this is so simplified. So yes,
but Kendi, how to be an anti-racist. I mean, I think it's pop pseudo cultural criticism that caught a moment in the arc of American urban, sort of domestic politics history. It's related to a lot of stuff going on in the universities, the George Floyd and Michael Brown stuff, and it's a part of the warp and the woof. But a touchstone, an anchor around which I would try to build a pole, to which I would then juxtapose another pole. Mm-hmm. And I would say, in a similar spirit, although I'm more friendly to the concrete position of Coleman Hughes, I mean, I think a precocious young intellectual coming along who happens to be a complex social product of ethnic and culture and racial and so forth and so on, with an interesting angle of vision on life, hardly constitutes Socrates. The argument for a colorblind America that I found in the end of race politics, they were reactive. They were what is it? You have the anti-racists, but the anti-racists that are really racist because they're trafficking in these categories that the true anti-racists were the civil rights icons. I mean,
You're
it's way
speaking
too,
like
it's
a
way too
synthesis
pat. It's
thinker.
way
I
too
gotta
pat.
say, Glenn, you sound like you are. I mean, but you're doing the equal opportunity criticism, right? You're seeing the flaws of each side. You're looking at the bathwater, and I'm like, okay, so where's the little baby?
No, well, here's what I'm saying. I could try to invoke James Baldwin or somebody. I just wrote a memoir. I'm not James Baldwin. I'm not close to James Baldwin. Don't misunderstand me to be thinking I'm comparing myself to James Baldwin. I just wrote a memoir. It's about my life as a Black man. I'm a Black man. Race is important to me. My race is African American. I'm Black. I'm a descendant of slaves forged in the 20th and 21st century on the North American continent, whose ancestors, most of them, are of African descent, although some are of European descent and some may be of Native origin, my ancestors. But my narrative, how I understand my life, is intimately connected with race.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to tell me that it's a lie, if I were that kind of person, I could say it offends me. I'm not that kind of person. I'm
You're
not that kind of person, but it certainly doesn't see me.
Yeah.
It is too busy to make a sophomoric point. I mean, an obvious point. This is superficial. I understand that this is superficial. Foundational history, culture, and lived experience have been grounded on this.
Totally.
The guy that wants to simply call the whole thing off is not a neutral player in the game. He or she is an agent on behalf of forces in the game. Take responsibility for that position.
Yeah. So, Glenn, I'm going to make a confession in the spirit of confessions. I don't actually know fully where I land on that. So if you can, you might be able to guess who was advising me. One of the people who was advising me on this script was Greg Thomas. And I was still very much and I still might be, I'm not totally sure. I think where I was something like, under what circumstances, if any, is race a useful idea? I wasn't sure I was willing to just completely close the door on race and say, under no circumstances, right? I feel like I can imagine a couple in which we might want to retain that notion. I also very much see that race has been used as a weapon. Race was invented to perpetrate racism. I'm actually not sure fully. My position might change. This is what ended up in the script now, but I can kind of confess to you, I don't know. I'm still not fully 100% sure that I would say close the door on the idea of race always and forever. I'll just say that. I'll confess that. That said, I also just, in the spirit of like, this doesn't just land right in the center and everyone gets to be happy. I mean, where the synthesis lands, even with that, the synthesis is kind of, I mean, it is saying, the idea of race is not helpful, and reifying it in the way of anti-racism is very unhelpful. So it's landing on one, but it is saying, however, even Martin Luther King's idea of colorblindness accepts that race exists, but says we should ignore it. And that's the difference, is that race doesn't exist. And we don't need to pretend it exists in order to. However, might we still retain it in some ways? And like you just described, maybe. I'm still not So
in a world in which we celebrate Ketanji Brown Jackson's elevation to the United States Supreme Court and Kamala Harris's elevation to the vice presidency of the United States of America, and we count that as progress, in a world in which a national movement has been set afoot by a police officer discharging his weapon in a situation of law and order, based on the racial identity of the people who were involved, white police officer, Black kid. I have to ask myself, the people who are devoting themselves to the project of, let's get rid of race. This is quixotic. and it's an avoidance somehow, and it. I'm sorry because this gets personal, and I don't mean to, diminish the integrity of anybody. I'm not questioning the integrity. I just. Oh, and by the way, let's do a racial inventory of the race abolitionists.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're mostly black.
Yes, they are.
Well, you know, I don't know. Maybe it's a small point. Race doesn't matter except that with respect to the race of the persons who are raising the question about whether or not race matters.
I don't know if I would say race doesn't matter. I think, I would say, the way that I had, race is an idea. And the way that I think about it, because this is just, me, the way that I think is I often use the refrain, under what circumstances, if any. So for me, it's under what circumstances, if any, is race a helpful idea? Helpful for what? Obviously, that begs the question, what are we trying to do here? Which is its own conversation, but that's how I would kind of frame that. And I mean, maybe I could just ask you, like, under what circumstances do you consider race to be a helpful idea?
Well, I don't think it's a helpful question with respect. I prefer to say, I prefer to think in terms not of generalized theoretical declaration, but in terms of, my grandchildren. So my son Glenn has a white partner. My son Nehemiah has a Chinese partner. My granddaughter might be dating a white guy one of these days soon. My other granddaughter decided to join a sorority that was not one of the Divine Nine, these Black women's social organizations like the AKAs and like the one that Kamala Harris is a alumnus of. But to join a white sorority because, well, her friend, including her really good and close friend whom she brought to my son Nehemiah's wedding, is a white kid. 100 years from now, Blackness won't be anything like what it is today. And I think that'll be evident in the way in which families are formed and children are being raised and partnerships of a variety of kind, including marital partnerships, are being undertaken. And I think it'll all be okay. I think it'll all be fine in the longer run. But in the same way that Irishness doesn't mean anything like what it meant at the turn of the 20th century in terms of identity and separateness and even racial self-understanding. I think we'll get there with respect to Africanness in the American context as well, in the fullness of time.
Maybe so.
But let's call the whole thing off. That's what I'm objecting to.
I hear you. I totally hear you. And I can say it sounds like we both want the same thing, right? I mean, the future that you just described, I mean, that's I think for me, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. It's like, what are we ultimately trying to do here? And whether your strategy is call the whole thing off or like, let it play itself out. I mean, like I'm okay with people kind of having different maybe strategies, but it's good to know that we have like, it sounds like we're kind of trying to move in the same direction. I'm still a little torn myself about the let's call the whole thing off too, for what it's worth. Yeah. But I like the idea. I like that it's as provocative as it is. I like the comparison to, it's the idea of witches that enabled witch burnings. That is actually helpful for me. It's like, oh yeah, gosh, what are we doing with this idea? What are we using it for?
We are different generations, you and I, Stephanie. I'm in my 70s, and I'm not asking you how old you are, but you're younger than that.
I'm younger, but Greg is in between us, and he feels very strongly about calling the whole thing off.
Yeah, I know he does. God bless him. He's a good brother. He's a good brother.
Yeah. I was going to say, how would you articulate if you were, well, yeah, you're saying that you consider it not a worthwhile exercise to try to kind of articulate a synthesis
Well,
perspective on race.
let me be completely honest, because I'm on the record here about transracial humanism and about transcending identity. You know, I mean, I have this speech I gave to the opening convocation, which is this big ceremony we have at the beginning of the school year here at Brown, called Identity and Authenticity. And basically my theme was, don't live in a silo. Don't define yourself by inherited characteristics like your race or, you know, your sexual orientation or whatever. I mean, you are these things. I'm not saying deny them, you know, but please don't make college into a reiteration of your identity. Think beyond the this. You know, think like this.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
such a
say
great
that.
invitation.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
thank you. And I say this especially to the students of color who I don't want to be isolated from the fullness of the curriculum. I don't want them to not read a book because it's by a dead white male. I don't want them to not join a glee club or you know, whatever, because you know I want them to like grow. I want them to become, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm suspicious of the identity-centered framing of the educational experience, and that's just one example of it. I mean, I want to say about this is shifting the register a little bit, but it's in the same colorblind spirit. I want to say about George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. Derek Chauvin, the cop, is white, and George Floyd, the guy that got the knee put on his neck, is black. And I want to say, was that a racial incident? And it was a racial incident. I don't want to get into a angels on the head of a pin argument with someone. I'm going to stipulate that it obviously, in some profound historic ways, was a racial incident. But I still want to interrogate the move that we make when we freight so much onto it based upon the racial identity of those people in that idiosyncratic encounter that transpired between them. And that impulse is very much simpatico with a let's get beyond race point of view. So
Yes,
I'm
totally.
conflicted myself at some level.
Yeah. Well, that's I just want to say, what a great invitation to incoming college students. I feel like that is like such a great age and time to be inviting them to not be like I honestly lately find myself like almost laughing at myself anytime I say a sentence that starts with I am. Like, what? What am I other than a total and unbelievable mystery to myself? Like, do I have any idea? but so I think that's a really, and actually, the way that the race video ends is very much in this. I'll just read. Let's see each other as the multifaceted, multidimensional, much deeper than skin color human beings that we are.